This show is intended for general purposes only, as individual situations may vary. Statements made should not be relied upon as recommendations or solicitation. When discussed, past performance is no guarantee or indication of future results. Nelson Financial Planning offers security through Nelson Ivest Brokerage Services, member FINRA, and SIPC.
Good Sunday morning. This is Bud Hettinger. Next on News Radio 102.5 WFLA, the longest-running radio show in Central Florida, Dollars and Cents, with my good friend Joel Garris from Nelson Financial Planning. You can call him at the office this week at 407-629-6477 to schedule your free consultation to discuss your retirement plans. Or you can talk to him right now at 407-916-5400.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Dollars and Cents. My name is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. You're listening to News Radio 102.5 WFLA. On the program, as is always the case, we've got a full slate of various topics. We'll talk a little bit about value versus growth, an old theme as it relates to investments, but one that never really seems to go away. And certainly the current performance out there in the market is necessitating a conversation once again about value versus growth. So certainly we will cover that topic. Also had an interesting conversation this past week about the Florida prepaid plan. And in this particular case, it was effectively going to surrender the entire amount, or force the surrender of the entire amount that was put into the plan. Unbelievable. We'll explain that on the program as well. Along with, we'll talk about the honeymoon phase of retirement. How can you survive the honeymoon phase and get through that first phase so that the rest of your retirement is enjoyable? And then, of course, as is typically the case, we got to talk about the folks in Washington. They are floating around a number of changes, or tweaks, as they like to refer to them, to the retirement system as a whole, along with some additional disclosure on particularly 401k statements. So that's the full list of topics that we'll hit this morning on the program. It's a full list, so we will begin right away. So the folks up in Washington are looking at making some various tweaks to 401ks and just generally the retirement account structure. And again, these are proposals that are on the table. They are not yet law yet, but we like to even talk about them when they are proposals so folks can be ready for them should they ever become law. So, perhaps the biggest piece is making an annuity a bigger portion of a 401k. Now, if you've listened to the program somewhat often, you know that anytime I say the word annuity, that usually means that I have to take an antacid tablet because they sort of churn my stomach. They're one of the most oversold, most misunderstood, highest commission, highest cost products out there. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. But the folks in Washington, in their infinite wisdom, are trying to figure out a way to make it easier. And I love it when government always tries to figure out a way to make things easier, right? Don't you? Oftentimes that winds up meaning that you're just going to have a higher cost. But to make it easier so that people can get a better handle on what their income would be based upon the amount of money in their 401k. Okay? So that's taking the 401k balance and converting it over to an income stream on a guaranteed basis like in an annuity. That's called retirement income planning, and it's certainly one of the things that we've talked about many times before on the program. That is a full-blown analysis that requires you to look not just at your income, but also at your expenses, the types of expenses that you have, fixed versus variable versus discretionary, the type of income that you have, what's fixed, what's variable, what's guaranteed to come in, what's not. That's a much fuller analysis. So it always makes me chuckle when the folks in Washington think that with some additional disclosure on a piece of paper, that's okay. Folks will figure it all out. Well, good luck, particularly if you are making it all about the annuity option. Annuities still cost a ton of money, but the folks in Washington think that somehow the insurers are going to figure out a way to keep the cost low and offer them on a group basis. Okay, well, good luck on that. We've yet to see that for sure. But the notion is to have a number on your 401k statement that says this is how much income you could expect to receive based upon how much income you've got in your portfolio. The problem that I have with that is it's garbage in, produces garbage out. And I am quite sure that the interest rates that they will use are going to be so much lower than what you could possibly ever really shoot for, that it's going to really skew the number. Meaning it's going to skew the number much, much lower, with the incentive or the perverse effect of you wind up having to keep working because that guaranteed annuity number isn't ever going to be enough to replace your income the way that you'd like it to. But just be aware that that is, in fact, potentially coming down the pike. Can't wait to see what that looks like. Boy, talk about worthless information, but that's what they're putting on there because, it's too hard to figure out how much income I'm going to get in retirement. Well, yeah, no duh. The retirement's a difficult process. It's a full analysis. You can't just break it all down into one little magic number you're going to put on a statement, and that's going to solve the problem for everybody. Thanks, Washington, but no thanks. Now, they are also looking at some other tweaks as well. Beyond this disclosure stuff on 401ks, where they want to make it a requirement to show an estimate of the monthly income that you could get off of the balance if it was put into an annuity. I mean, my goodness, I wonder how hard the insurance industry lobbied for this one. Okay, because now if you're in a 401k, it's going to seem like the annuity is the option to follow. I wonder how much the insurance industry lobbied for this. Probably quite a bit, I would imagine. But boy, they got some good lobbyists up there, no question at all. There's some other stuff that the folks in Washington are also looking at changing. We will cover the rest of the list that's floating around in Washington when we get back from these messages here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris, Nelson Financial Planning, News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Well, the folks in Washington are up to it again, throwing around some proposals with the intent of making things easy. I always get nervous when they do that. So there's a lot of tweaks to the retirement system being proposed out there. Some of them might be good. Others I don't know are necessary, and still others would be only add to the confusion. Particularly, one of the main ones that's being bandied around is adding 2 disclosures for 401k plans. So on your statement, you would be shown an estimate of the monthly income that you could get off of your current balance if you put that money all into an annuity. As I mentioned in the prior segment, I guess the insurance company really has some good lobbyists to get that right. Here's one though that many people would say, oh, well, that's good. Removing the age cap for making an IRA contribution, allowing people above age 70 and a half to deposit up to $6,500 a year in either a traditional IRA or a Roth. Now, you still would have to take the required minimum distribution, but if you are working and you're over age 70 and a half, you could certainly shelter some of that into a contribution. So that would certainly be something worthwhile to allow folks that are, still working. And look, it doesn't mean that you'd working full time. Just some part-time work will trigger your eligibility to fund a retirement account. So they're thinking about eliminating the age 70 and a half. That would be good. Also looking at some new types. This is the one where I always get worried, rolling out something new. They're looking at some new types of universal savings accounts that would offer more flexible withdrawal rules than existing retirement accounts. The reason that there are those non-flexible withdrawal rules on an IRA or any type of retirement account is to encourage people to actually save for retirement and not treat it like a cookie jar. I mean, that's the purpose of the rules, is to at least put up some kind of a stop sign before you raid your retirement. I don't know that Washington needs to create other types of savings accounts that gives you more flexibility to withdraw money out of your retirement. I mean, don't we have a little bit of a retirement crisis? Don't we have a tremendous amount of people when they retire just collecting Social Security? And the folks in Washington we want to make it more flexible or easier to steal from your retirement when you're 40. Not sure about that one. Also, now this one might actually be worthwhile. The ability to pool your 401k plans. One of the issues with 401k plans is they have a tendency to be quite expensive because you have to go through an annual filing, a 5500 filing with the government every year. There's a cost involved in that. You also have to go through the process of making sure that the folks that make a bunch of money aren't overloading the 401k. It's what's known as top-heavy testing. So there's a lot of stuff that you have to go through and work through to make sure that your 401k is legitimate under the rules. And so that creates a bit of a cost, particularly for small employers. About one half of private sector employees, many of which work for small companies, don't even have a retirement plan at work. So what this proposal would do is it would allow small employers to band together and sort of spread out the administrative costs of a 401k plan. It would eliminate the proposal at hand would eliminate the requirement that these employers really have a connection at all. And so you could just go to another random employer and say, hey, you want to go into a pool together on a 401k to help share the costs. And certainly you could do that. So that's an interesting one, particularly when you consider that half the folks out there, don't have a retirement plan at work. That's certainly an interesting one. I'm not sure rolling out other accounts that allow you to rob from your retirement or catering to the insurance company and putting annuity amounts on your statements are good ones. But the repeal of age 70 and a half in terms of when you can actually make a contribution, certainly that's a good thing. If you're still working even on a part-time basis, you might be able to take advantage of that. So keep an ear out for that, as I know we will. Because those are the types of things that are floating around in Washington these days. Remember, of course, it is a midterm election year. If you've missed any of the commercials, it's election season coming upon us, and I don't know how really any of this gets much traction in Washington, because everybody up there is now fully interested in preserving their job. Really all about job security right now for the folks in Washington. So unlikely that you would see a big move in retirement. But stay tuned. We will, of course, keep you posted. One follow-up item from the story we were telling last week, The Nightmare on 401k Street is how we titled that episode. On the various social media outlets. The more I'm chewing through that one, the more I cannot emphasize enough. Do not leave your money in a 401k or 403b platform. Do not do it. Roll that over to an IRA, because if you don't, the stretch provisions are generally not available on a 401k or 403b. The situation we described last week was a woman whose husband passed away, kept the 403b or the 403b with the current provider, and now she passes away, and the beneficiary is being told, well, you gotta continue those distributions out of that IRA based upon the same schedule that your grandmother chose when your grandfather passed away. Wait a second. That means that you've got to distribute the money out over a 6 or 7 year period of time, whereby on a traditional beneficiary IRA, depending upon your age, you might be able to spread that out over 50 or 60 years? Really? That's the problem. Don't leave that money there, particularly if you pass away. In this case, passed away. She actually intended to roll it over to an IRA, but when she talked with the provider, they convinced her to stay. Because, it's, a great platform and all this. And the reality is, what she didn't realize at the time is she was setting the distribution schedule in motion for that entire balance to be paid out over a much, much shorter period of time than had she stepped into the shoes and put it into an IRA. That would have made all the difference in the world. So pay attention. Make sure that old money doesn't just sit there. Because what can happen is somebody may make a decision that ultimately requires the distribution of all of those taxable dollars over a much, much shorter period of time. When we get back, we will continue the conversation. We'll hit value versus growth, an oldie but a goodie. We'll talk about those two different investing options when we return here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning on News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. The back half of the program here on Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. This segment on the program, we're going to talk a little bit about some good old-fashioned investment approaches. One is known as growth. One is known as value. The difference is that traditionally a growth company would be more inclined to take its profit and reinvest it into itself. A value company, on the other hand, would be more inclined to take that profit and pay it out on as a dividend. Those are sort of the biggest traditional marker of the difference between value versus growth. Right now, if you're looking that closely at your statements, growth has it by quite a bit, particularly over the course of the past year. Not uncommon to see a growth fund comparing against a value fund with the same types of companies in it, large companies or maybe mid-sized companies or small companies. Very common to see the growth fund with a return over the past 12 months that might very well be double what the value fund did. And so the reason we like to raise this is when we see that difference or that split, then we always like to remind people that's the importance of diversification. Because if you only own growth and it's 1999, then the next couple of years did not play out so well for your growth portfolio. Meanwhile, your value portfolio actually hung in there and generated a little bit of return. So as you're looking at your numbers, if you're circling numbers of investments that have not done particularly well over the past 12 months, make sure you're not circling it because it's following the value approach rather than the growth approach. Because the growth approach clearly getting all the headlines, the Facebooks, the FANGs. We've talked about that before on the show. Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. Today, those 5 companies make up 15% of the total performance of the S&P 500. We'll say that again. S&P 500 is supposed to be 500 different companies. It is a market-weighted index. So the bigger you are, the more you're going to drive what actually happens in that index. In the example of the big 5, the FANGs, they actually, in fact, make up 15% of that index, more than the bottom 281 companies, in fact. So when we think diversification, make sure that we're diversified properly between both value and growth, because we've certainly seen these seasons before where one type of investment strategy can get very much into favor, become all the rage, and then the story changes. And when the story changes, that's certainly when you don't want to be left holding just growth. It's important to be balanced. It's important to be diversified and have a little bit of both in your portfolio in order to be able to be properly diversified. But it does jump right out at you. If you're looking at 12-month trailing returns, your growth fund is up double, sometimes even triple what your comparable value fund is. But that's not a reason to just throw the value all away. That does have will often have a valuable part in your portfolio, because those dividends that those value companies traditionally pay out are a good way to get some baseline level of retirement income when you get to that point. So be aware of this value versus growth. If you're looking at your performance, particularly analyzing it over the course of the past 12 months, remember that and don't let that sort of skew the analysis, because right now there certainly is a big difference in value versus growth, and certainly in terms of how the performance numbers are coming out for sure. Speaking of a big difference, this latest from the Florida prepaid college plan just blew me away. I was having a conversation with a client this past week, and we got on this topic, and I just could not believe that the Florida prepaid college plan was basically going to keep all of his money unless he did something. And it just goes to underscore the issue or the problem that you're going to run into when you're dealing with a government plan that has been set up. That government makes up the rules as they go along to a certain extent. So in this particular example, this individual had set up a 529 prepaid plan for his daughter many years ago. His daughter never used it, and he was trying to get it transferred over to his son. Well, what he was told was, because there was a 15-year age difference, or more than a 15-year age difference between daughter and son, that he was not allowed to do that. Even though they were siblings, you were not allowed to change the beneficiary on the account. I understand philosophically their position, because obviously the cost of college is much greater now than it was back then. But at the end of the day, it's the same generation. It's not like you're trying to move it out to a different generation. You're not trying to move it to a different branch of the family tree. It's the same branch of the family tree, but yet this individual is being told, hey, you're out of luck. And it gets worse. It gets worse. Not only is he out of luck to extend it, but the options that they're giving to him are terrible. We'll break down those options when we get back after these messages. So stay tuned on that. This one really is going to surprise you. So hold on for that after these messages. You're listening to Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris, Nelson Financial Planning, News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
This is Bud Hedinger. You know, you can talk to Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning right now on Dollars and Cents about anything to do with your money by calling 407-916-5400. Give him a call. It's time to make sense of your dollars.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. We'll continue this conversation that we started about the Florida prepaid college plan. Another great example of how government just sort of makes up the rules as it goes along. And you don't really have any ability to control it. In this particular scenario, it was a Florida prepaid plan that was set up back in the early 90s for one child who never wound up using it. A few years goes by, and then there's a second child. Unfortunately, the age gap between those two children, or I guess unfortunately in the example here, is that the age gap was more than 15 years. So the state of Florida prepaid college plan said, no, we're not going to let you transfer that over to the younger sibling. I mean, this isn't even, I mean, it's not like it's a cousin. It's not like it's a different branch of the tree. It's the same tree. And basically the state said, nope, here are your options. Now remember, he prepaid 4 years of university tuition, which is the equivalent of like $30,000. When he paid it back in the early 90s, it was $7,000. Well, yeah, now it's worth $30,000, as it should be. That's the concept of the prepaid plan. You prepay it, and then if the value goes up, you get that benefit. Unless this comes into play, which is, there's a 15-year age difference, and so no, we're not going to let you continue it or extend it. And in fact, if you don't do anything, we'll keep the money. Seriously. The letter that he got gave him two options. You can either get back what you originally put into it all the way back in the early 90s, so the $7,000. So $7,000 that effectively is a $30,000 benefit today. Oh, no, we're only going to give you back the $7,000, and that's it. So it was $7,000 just sat there and did nothing. Unbelievable. What's worse is the communication that he got from the Florida prepaid is, if you don't do anything, well, you're going to forfeit the money, even the $7,000 he put in. I mean, this is how silly some government rules are, particularly when government tries to get in the business of investing and managing money. Just trying to slide it over to a sibling, Florida Prepaid College Plan says, nope. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to give you the effective current benefit of it. We're only going to give you back your original contribution. And if you don't let us know what you want, we're just going to close it out and keep the money. Can you believe that? Unbelievable. Folks, be careful with this stuff. Governments like to make up these rules, and ultimately the devil is in the details. The devil's in the fine print. Sorry, I don't mean to have the show be fixated on my personal mistrust of government, but we're just given too many examples of how it doesn't work on the program, ranging from the insurance lobby pushing the Congress to include disclosures about annuities on 401k statements. Really? That's a powerful lobby. To the state of Florida prepaid plan basically keeping your money on a plan you didn't use unless you tell them otherwise. Why isn't the default, hey, we'll give you a refund plus interest? The default is we're going to keep your money, or the other option you have is we're just going to return it to you after 25 years? Really? That's a problem. Beware. Watch this stuff. That's why we do the radio program, is to keep you informed of things like this. Don't know if you all saw this. This is out of MIT, the folks at MIT. So you know it's going to be pretty smart, right? It came out of MIT. The folks in MIT have identified 4 phases of retirement. And I think they've actually perhaps hit the nail on the head. So we'll go through what those 4 phases are, because I think there's a lot of truth to them. The first phase is the honeymoon phase. That's when you're just kind of, man, I'm free of work. It's like an extended vacation. The problem with the honeymoon phase is twofold. Number one, that's when you're going to use a lot of your savings because you're younger, you're active, and you're most likely wanting to continue the same lifestyle and travel and whatnot that you did while you were still working, because that, after all, is what you just were doing. So the honeymoon phase is, in fact, kind of one of the trickier phases of retirement, because your spending goes up, your free time goes up, and effectively you're breaking a routine that you've been doing for 60 years. Stop and think about that. the school routine, the work routine that most people have been doing for 60 years or so before they retire looks something like this, right? You get up, get dressed, you go to school, you go to work, do that, then you come home, you eat dinner, and then you go to bed. That's been the routine for most people when they enter into retirement for about 60 years. It's hard to change routines. Hence, the honeymoon phase of retirement is often one of the trickiest to navigate because you are fundamentally changing that routine that you've been on for 60 years. So some suggestions as you approach that is find ways to create that new routine. Look to expand on things like hobbies or activities and other ways that you can become productive, whether it's taking a class or learning a new skill or even volunteering or working part-time, because that honeymoon phase can be quite tricky. The second phase, according to researchers at MIT, the second phase of retirement, they call the big decision phase. So that's kind of the decision, the point in time where you start making those bigger decisions about where ultimately are you going to reside for the rest of your life. That might be when you might consider moving into some type of retirement community of some kind. So selling the house, for example, that you've brought the kids up in and whatnot. That's really the big decision phase. And then the next phase is navigating a longevity phase. Again, these are very smart-sounding words because obviously this came out of this MIT study. Navigating longevity phase, that's a simple issue of, well, wait a minute, we're all living longer, right? And how do we deal with the cost? How do we deal with the cost of health care? And how do we deal with the ever-rising cost of everything based upon inflation? And then the fourth phase, which is again a pretty accurate description, often becomes the solo journey phase. So the solo journey phase, many of your friends have passed away, maybe your spouse has passed away, and it becomes one of very heightened isolation. So certainly the article out of MIT, I think, really does convey those four phases of retirement. I think far too often, the interesting perspective on this article is that far too often people think of retirement as all kind of homogeneous, okay? But the reality is that there really are some very different chapters in retirement. And I don't know that MIT's necessarily hit the nail on the head here, but obviously it's MIT, so they're pretty close. But certainly the honeymoon phase, the big decision phase, navigating longevity phase, and then the solo journey phase, we certainly see those play out in the lives of the people that we help on a regular basis. The biggest issue, and the one that most people miss, is that in that honeymoon phase, you're fundamentally breaking a routine that you've been doing for 60 years. That's number one. Number two, so you better have some hobbies or some things to do to help to develop that new routine. Because if you don't have a game plan, you're going to get lost pretty quick. And number two, in those early stages, the honeymoon phase, and to a certain extent the big decision phase, when you're kind of selling that house, downsizing, maybe moving closer to where the grandkids are, those decisions typically are moments when you will in fact actually need more money than what you need in the later phases, and oftentimes people kind of forget that those first couple of phases of retirement do in fact are instances where you wind up spending more money. So you've got to sort of have that in your retirement projection as well. So some interesting stuff out of the folks at MIT, and certainly some good descriptions on those phases of retirement. Certainly things that we've talked about before, but I think the labels that the folks at MIT use are actually pretty accurate for what people go through in retirement. Remember, it's not just a homogeneous time period. It is a time period where you will evolve and change and experience different things, much like you did during your work career. Well, that's about it. We will wrap it up. We are out of here for this week. Thank you all for listening to the program. If you missed it, it'll be up on social media and whatnot tomorrow, and you can check it out there. You've been listening to Dollars and Cents. This is Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning here on News Radio 102.5 WFLA.
This is Bud Hettinger, and you've been listening to Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. If you missed any part of today's show or want to listen to it again, check out the radio show at www.nelsonfinancialplanning.com or connect with them on Facebook or Twitter. Be sure to call Joel this week at 407-629-6477 to schedule your free consultation to discuss your retirement plan.